Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Vivian Schiller, and I am the Executive Director of Aspen Digital, a program of the Aspen Institute. Our topic today, the COVID pandemic and the cascading crises around race and democracy have put into sharp focus a calamity long in the making, and that is the digital divide between those who have access and resources to make use of online connectivity and those who are left out in the cold for reasons of access, affordability, or other obstacles to adoption. This is a crisis that is particularly acute for communities of color in both urban and rural areas. Now, today, 10 years after the National Broadband Plan first raised awareness for these issues, the National Urban League, working with other civil rights organizations and public policy experts, has developed the Lewis Latimer Plan for Digital Equity and Inclusion. It is a detailed and comprehensive agenda to overcome the existing gaps and reach the goal at long last of universal access. We are happy to be first introducing that plan today. And we are so pleased to have with us the President and CEO of the National Urban League, Marc Morial. He will introduce the plan and will later be joined by a really stellar panel of industry and civil society experts and thinkers and doers. And then later in the hour, we will take your question. So I'm about to introduce Marc. Again, he runs the National Urban League, which is the nation's largest historic civil rights and urban advocacy organization. He was previously mayor of New Orleans from 1994 to 2002, where he is credited with leading New Orleans Renaissance. Before I let Marc finally speak, I wanted just one piece of housekeeping, which is, as I mentioned, we are going to be getting to your questions a little bit later in the hour. At any time, starting right now, you are welcome to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can enter your questions there. If you try to keep them as succinct as possible. If you feel comfortable doing so, please add your name and your affiliation. It just gives more context for the question. So again, at any time. And with that, Marc, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you very much, Vivian. Thank you to Aspen, not only for hosting this conversation today, but for all of the important thought leadership work that Aspen has done for many, many years and continues to do, particularly in these areas. Let me also thank in advance the co-panelists who are all people with whom we've had a chance to work with over many, many years. I deeply respect their commitment, their knowledge and expertise, and many of them have been teachers of mine in the sense of every conversation about digital, about broadband, about technology, are great conversations through which I always learn. We're proud to share some, if you will, nuggets and an overview of the Lewis Latimer Plan for Digital Equity and Inclusion. What motivates this plan is the idea that with a new administration coming into office, there's always a chance for a fresh start, a new look, new energy, new, if you will, thinking and new actions towards solving old problems. The digital divide, the issues of equity and technology and broadband are well known to many experts. However, the will, the energy, a plan to confront it, one that we can all agree on, one that we can all get behind, has greatly eluded us. So Lewis Latimer, for those that may not know, was an African-American inventor and patent draftsman. And he's responsible for the patents of the incandescent light bulb, among many other inventions. His home is a historic, if you will, site, and it's located near the Latimer Projects in Flushing, Queens. He's best known perhaps for his work as a part of Thomas Edison's team for many, many years. And it is in the spirit of Lewis Latimer, a pioneer, a man who was ahead of his time, a brilliant scientist, inventor, and patent draftsman, that we, if you will, assemble this plan. This plan, we hope, has brought together the very best thinking of industry, of, if you will, consumer advocates, as well as civil rights organizations in an effort to be able to go forward. And it is motivated by three basic principles. One is to get networks everywhere, which we call availability. To get everyone on those networks, which we call adoption. And to get everyone to benefit from an economic point of view. And that's called access. And so one might think of this as this Lewis Latimer Plan is 3 A's: availability, adoption, and access. And it is motivated by the idea in this age, 2021, this age where there's been a new awakening around racial justice, this age where we're in the post-George Floyd America, or in the era of George Floyd America, that equity and inclusion must be an animating theme throughout all public policy undertakings that we pursue in these times. When it comes to availability, we are all knowledgeable that millions of American homes, businesses, and enterprises have no broadband network available capable of allowing them to fully participate in the economy and society. Now, for many, this is generally a rural problem, but not only a rural problem. And it has been an issue where private capital alone has been unwilling to invest in deploying in low density areas that require higher capital costs to reach fewer customers. I want to help people understand rural America is not white America. Rural America is white, it's Black, it's Latino, it's Asian. There are people of all backgrounds that live in rural America across the South, the Midwest, the mountain states, and the far West. And we have to help people understand this problem in this context and understand that availability, while primarily a rural problem, is not only a rural problem. But in thinking about how to address it, we have got to educate policymakers that in 21st century America, access to high-speed broadband is a necessity, not a nicety. It is essential to everything everyone does in the 21st century. And that compels greater private action and compels greater public investment in closing the availability gap. So the Latimer Plan and our plan for availability, adoption, and access contemplates greater public investment in extending, if you will, high-speed broadband to those areas that are underserved in America today. And there are a wide range in the plan. When we actually release the final version of the written plan, will offer a whole host of options and differential approaches to achieve this very important goal. We all know there was once a time in America where electricity was considered a nicety and not a necessity. There was once a time when telephone service was considered a luxury and not a necessity. And as America evolved, having a telephone in your home, having electricity in your home, and then I would say having indoor plumbing in your home became a basic standard of American life. I think we're at the point today where every home, every business, every community center, every faith-based operation must be connected to high-speed broadband, no matter where it is in the 50 states of the United States. And that ought to be a goal, and that ought to be an objective. Secondly, the second A, adoption. For many Americans, what they need for technology, what they need for broadband and digital readiness is unaffordable. The State of Black America report and our technology index demonstrated that African Americans over-indexed every other group when it came to mobile phones, but under-indexed when it came to in-home, high-speed broadband connection. And obviously, people recognizing the necessity of being connected to the internet are choosing a phone because of its broad capabilities over high-speed broadband. But a phone is not a great place for a child to do homework. And a phone is not a great place for a person to fill out an application for a job. And a phone is sometimes difficult for people to be able to do financial transactions on a consistent basis. We need to close this adoption gap. And once again, the role of the government, the role of the private sector in understanding that having a mobile phone is not enough. Today, most households need access to multiple devices. They may need, and if they can afford it, they're going to have a desktop. They may also have a laptop. They may have an iPad, and they may have a phone for each individual or within the family unit. We've got to close this, if you will, adoption gap, and we've got to fundamentally address the unaffordability gap. Digital readiness, which is a part of the adoption gap, is certainly the idea that people need skills to use information and communication technology to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information. I have to tell you, I'm impressed with children's ability and young people's ability to manage and manipulate the internet. Fundamentally, I think the adoption gap is an affordability issue, and an affordability issue which we must tackle. And again, we need public and private activity, public and private action. The Lifeline program needs substantial reform. And in the Latimer Plan, we talk about how that might in fact be the case. Also, as a part of the, if you will, gap with respect to adoption, there's issues about utilization, workforce development, healthcare, K through 12 education, higher ed, and R&D. We've witnessed, ladies and gentlemen, we've witnessed in America in this COVID pandemic how valuable technology is. And we've also witnessed how when people do not have access to it, they're left behind. It's painful. It's hurtful. It's not fair for children in schools who are trying to work remotely have to go sit in a parking lot of McDonald's to be able to connect to their Wi-Fi to be able to do their homework. It is absolutely wrong that in fact is the case. Today we've learned that in some communities, as many as 50% of kids dropped off the grid, never logged in, discontinued their schooling experience when schooling went online. So when I hear people championing online learning, I say it works for some, it doesn't work for others. In New York, there's a view that as much as 25% of all kids dropped off the grid, never logged in, discontinued their learning experience when in fact learning went online. Is it because of adoption issues? Is it because of availability issues? Whatever it was, is it because of lack of digital readiness? Whatever it is, we are compelled by COVID and the emergency we've been in to elevate the importance in the new administration, in the new Congress, to bring together civil rights, consumer groups, business groups, labor groups for a compact, if you will, to address these issues. And then, how do we get everyone to benefit from the economic, if you will, prosperity that technology is creating? Some of America's richest people, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, to name a few, are people who made their money from building incredible technology companies. But the ability of all people to benefit from the jobs and the business opportunities that this new industry has created may be the harshest digital divide of all. Black and brown people are not adequately represented in the boardrooms, for the most part, of major technology, telecommunications, and telecommunication supplier companies. African Americans and Latinos and even women are underrepresented in the C-suites of many of the businesses in the sector. And African Americans and Latinos are underrepresented in all manner of jobs across the board in the technology sector, with the exception of some companies that have made marked progress, like many telcos and some cable companies. So the National Urban League has pioneered by working in this area over the last 10 years, securing agreements from companies like Comcast and Charter and T-Mobile, for example, to make meaningful commitments towards improving the notion that all people in all communities must benefit from the wealth and the economic prosperity that this industry is creating. So part of the Lewis Latimer Plan for Digital Equity and Inclusion includes that also. This idea that this prosperity must be spread, and we must be as intentional as we are about availability and adoption. We truly have to be intentional about access from a policy standpoint, from a design of program standpoint, from how we do business in this industry. I'll close by saying that we're at a moment of great opportunity. But we're also at a moment where we cannot view this from yesterday's perspective only. We have to view this in the context of these times. We've learned why availability and adoption is so critical from COVID. And we've learned through the tragedy of George Floyd why economic inclusion and economic access is so critical to every industry in America, and certainly the technology industry, which is leading the way when it comes to the 21st century. So more details on the Latimer Plan will be revealed in the very near future. I'm proud because it's the first time I've had an opportunity to publicly discuss, to share some thoughts about what the Latimer Plan is all about. I want to thank the many, many people, especially my colleague Clint Odom, and a number of others who've quarterbacked the details pursuant to this plan. We've had help from Blair, we've had help from Smitty. These great experts have been so essential to where we are going. Let me finally say this: a plan that sits on paper and isn't actualized or energized is useless. The reason why we put this plan together, we put it together as a battle plan, as a plan to chart the course that I hope we can take together to try to improve equity and inclusion in the fast-growing digital America. So thank you very much. Again, thank you to Aspen. I look forward to questions, conversations, and the panel.
Great. Thank you, Marc, for such a clear picture of what you're trying to achieve. I do have a follow-up question to you directly related to one of your last comments, which is about, a plan is only as good as the ability to make it happen. But before we do that, I'm going to bring on the other panelists so that we can all be part of the conversation. So let me introduce them and bring them on, and then I'll come back to you with the question, Marc. So we've got with us Donna Epps. Donna is Verizon's Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Strategic Alliances. She leads the development of Verizon's strategic public policy, including a focus on issues like 5G, consumer privacy, broadband access, as we're discussing here today, and consumer protection. We also have Paula Boyd, Senior Director, Government and Regulatory Affairs for Microsoft, where she leads internet policy engagement with the FCC, Congress, and the outgoing and incoming administration on broadband, spectrum, internet protocol, voice, video, and text. And we are also pleased to have with us Brent Wilkes. He is the Senior VP for Institutional Development at the Hispanic Federation. He has more than 3 decades of public policy, program development, nonprofit management, and Latino advocacy expertise. He has dedicated his life to improving the quality of life for the Latino community. Welcome to all of you. I have many questions for all of you, and a reminder to our audience, please drop your questions in the Q&A. We're going to come to them soon. But first, a follow-up question to you, Marc. As you said, you mentioned that no matter how good a plan is, it's got to be put into action. So you have been active with the Biden-Harris transition team and the Congress, including the president and vice president-elect, cabinet designees. What's your sense from these conversations about how receptive the new Congress and administration are to equity and inclusion broadly, and specifically about the when it comes to the infrastructure and broadband space? Oops, Marc, you're muted.
Yep. Yeah, a great deal of enthusiasm and commitment from the president-elect himself and members of his economic team about addressing those issues that affect racial justice in this country. Clearly, they are saying, and I think you'll hear the president-elect talk more about this when he gives his inaugural speech, that racial justice is going to be a theme that will touch every policy decision he makes. So I think to a great extent, as we think about this, we have to think about how, in all of its elements, it helps to close the economic divide in America. And the racial justice divide, the urban-rural divide, the rich-poor divide, the Black-white-Hispanic divide, to the extent that we are skating to that puck, I think we're skating to where this administration certainly wants to go.
Great. Always love a good Gretzky quote. Thank you.
Yeah.
Donna, I'm going to turn to you. Obviously, from your perspective at Verizon, what do you, first of all, your general response to the plan, but also what should the national policy program be focused on? What element of this do you think is the most intractable?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Vivian. First of all, let me commend the National Urban League for putting this plan out. It gets a lot of things right and a lot of things that I agree with. I think the really important thing here is that it acknowledges that there are multiple barriers to adoption. So it's not just availability, but it's also lack of digital readiness, as Marc pointed out. It's affordability, it's lack of trust, it's relevance. So it's a variety of different issues. And so I think there's some very thoughtful proposals here. I should also add, Verizon is also putting out a white paper along these same lines in the near future. And conceptually, we agree with a lot of what the National Urban League has laid out. Here's the thing. I think in this country, we've spent decades talking about the digital divide. But primarily, the discussion and the policy debate at the federal level has been one of network deployment in rural areas, the availability issue, if you will. And that's important, and we should continue talking about that. But the data shows us there are about 20 million households that have not adopted home broadband. 5 million of those folks don't have access to it. It's not available. They're in rural areas. But 3 times as many people, 15 million folks, are geographically dispersed in urban and metro areas. And why haven't they adopted? It's because either they can't afford it, many of them can't afford it, and many of them don't have digital readiness, don't have the digital literacy skills to be able to optimize their use of it. So what I think we need to do at this point in the country is focus a lot more on those 2 adoption issues, the affordability issue, as well as the digital readiness issue. And frankly, we've done a great job in this country with programs like Lifeline and the Connect America Fund, but those programs standing alone are not enough. And as the Latimer Plan lays out, and we agree, we need to think differently about how we approach connecting low-income people to broadband. And to do that, we need to have a federal response from the government, which includes, frankly, a modernized approach to connecting low-income people that is federally funded and very targeted to allow the low-income population in this country to be able to better afford broadband, as well as funding for digital literacy and training and programs like that. And so I think that that is really, we have to have the political will. Public and private sector need to band together for, really a large coalition of support to say, now is the time. We can do better. We must do better. And it requires a prioritization by including funding, particularly for the affordability and the digital readiness piece in the federal budget. I should hasten to say we're happy to see Congress include broadband, a broadband benefit in the stimulus plan in December. That's great, but it is a temporary plan. And we know that this digital divide will outlive the public health crisis.
Yeah, thank you for that. You raise a really interesting, you've raised many interesting points, but one I want to pick up on and actually direct to Brent is, you mentioned that while there is absolutely, and Marc talked about this too, there are communities of color, there are low income communities across many underrepresented communities, groups in rural areas. There does seem to be a disproportionate focus politically on rural areas when in fact there are probably more people in need in rural areas. I'm curious. I'm sorry, in urban areas. I misspoke. Yeah. Well, you're welcome to take this too, Donna. I was going to ask Brent, both of you. How do there seems to be more bipartisan support around rural areas for all kinds of reasons, and I'm curious how you think about that and how we address and embrace the needs in urban areas as well.
Well, let me first of all congratulate Marc and Urban League again on this incredible report. It says a lot of the things that we've all been thinking for quite some time, but puts it in writing for the first time, and I think gives us an action plan. And I congratulate him on putting this together with Clint and the team. Very impressed with the work. So thank you, Marc, for your leadership.
Thanks, Brent.
Again, another critical issue. And to address your specific question, yes, it's very much the case that we have a challenge with Latinos and African Americans in urban communities, suburban communities, and rural areas that haven't adopted, not because the connectivity is not available, but haven't adopted because of the cost, in many cases, probably the primary case. Also, many of the things that Donna mentioned in terms of lack of comfortableness with the technology, lack of training, lack of opportunity. But I do want to emphasize one thing that Marc said here. I think that's really critical is that we're not involved in this effort to just become consumers of technology. We want to be the makers of technology. And African American and Latino communities for centuries have been makers. They've built our homes, they've built our infrastructure, they've picked our food. They've done incredible work to create the goods that America runs on. But in this one sector, we've seen that Latinos and African Americans have not been well represented. And the reason why the pipeline issues are so important, why connectivity is so important to us, is so that we can get Latinos and African Americans in a position to not only work for these great companies in the tech field, but actually be the owners of the tech companies, and to have a level playing field in which they can compete and succeed, and to be part of this incredible economy that's being created by the tech economy. So I think it's an absolutely great plan. We're excited about executing on the plan. I think that you really, Vivian, I think pointed out the challenge, which is politically speaking, there seems to be more emphasis just on rural connectivity, and that's important. We don't want to de-emphasize that, but I think anything that really wants to address the whole challenge confronting our communities is going to have to also look at the adoption issue in urban areas and rural, of course, but also then focusing on ensuring that there's opportunity for these young entrepreneurs and young technologists that we bring up through our educational programs and help put in a position to get these great jobs. I think the tech industry has to be put on notice that we expect them to not only hire these individuals that succeed through our training programs, but also give them opportunity, make room for them in this tech ecosystem so they can be successful too, because we want the tech industry to be just as diverse as the rest of the industries in America. And at the moment, it's not, and that's a big challenge for us going forward.
No, you're raising an excellent point. It's certainly not just about communities of color as consumers for the technology, but how important it is for communities of color to be entrepreneurs and leaders throughout the tech industry. Paula, I'm going to come to you now. Talk a little bit about, so, both you and also Donna, you're with Microsoft, Donna of course is with Verizon. What is the industry need from the government? What is the role of the private sector in making this happen? And of course, you're also welcome. We haven't gotten your feedback on the general report as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, Vivian, for the question. And before I jump in, just want to say thank you for allowing me to participate on the panel. It's a tremendously important issue, and so happy to participate. Also, congratulations to Marc and the National Urban League in pulling the plan together. It's a comprehensive plan. It touches on a lot of issues that are out there and a lot of challenges that have to be addressed, getting folks connected to broadband and getting utilization of broadband. I'm going to touch a little bit on the plan, and then I'll go to your question in terms of what does industry need. And frankly, I think the plan sort of outlines a bit of what industry needs. Microsoft is a cloud service provider. As a cloud service provider, the ability to get to our services means that you have to have broadband. We also know that if you don't have access to those services, there are opportunities that you will not be able to obtain. Marc talked about the kids who are not, no longer, who have fallen out of the education system with COVID. The folks who aren't able to get healthcare because they don't have connectivity and they can't get into a doctor's office. All of those challenges are important. All of those opportunities are important and impact individual opportunities and our opportunities as a nation. In terms of the plan, we certainly appreciate the highlighting the importance of addressing the availability gap. That is a challenge that has been a difficult one to address. Companies have tried over the years to fully address that challenge, but that challenge remains. We also believe that the adoption challenge has to be addressed as well. For us, when we think about adoption, and this I think is some of this is reflected in the plan, we think about the importance of making sure that consumers not only have the ability to afford the broadband service, but also have the skills to make use of that broadband service. We also appreciate that in some instances, you've got to have the right device. Without the right device, your experience and your ability to really leverage and utilize that service becomes challenging. One of the things too that I'd also say is that the plan outlines a utilization gap, and that one is important. It's not one that Microsoft has focused on beyond sort of the adoption piece of it. And I also appreciate that utilization gap is a challenging one to address. It probably cuts across government agencies. But that's when, in some ways, I sort of feel like that's when the magic begins to happen for consumers, for businesses, and for the nation. The ability to leverage the tools to enable commerce, the ability to leverage the tools to enable job skilling, to enable healthcare. I think those are all tremendous opportunities. One of the things I'll also flag in terms of the utilization gap, Something that our CEO Satya Nadella did an op-ed recently in Wired, and you referenced Dartmouth economist named Diego Commons, and the thesis there was that, you know, the differences between rich and poor nations can largely be explained by the speed at which they adopt industrial technologies. But equally important is the intensity that they put those technologies to use. You know, are the technologies just sitting there, or are they available and easy to use for a trained workforce? And I think the message I want to send there is that this issue is important to individual lives and critical to individual lives. But as we think about COVID, as we think about the economic challenges that we have as a nation, it's also important to being able to come out of that and have a bit of an economic recovery. It will help with that process as well. So with that said, in terms of what companies need, you know, I think a lot of it is outlined in the plan. I think of kind of what companies need probably in two ways. I think, you know, we've said this before, but I think we need to band together and make the ask. These are not easy issues to address. I mean, they have lingered for a long time. But we need to all, I think, come together, companies and nonprofits and civil society, and make the ask. I think we saw a bit of that last year. I think we need to do more of that as we move into the new year. But at the end of the day, I think industry benefits when everyone is connected. When everyone is connected, when everyone has adopted, when everyone is utilizing these technologies robustly. And so that would be the ask. The ask would be, let's come together, let's drive this issue really hard. Let's take advantage of the opportunity. We haven't all been in this space at this point in time. And so there's a tremendous opportunity before us. Totally appreciate that it will take funding to address some of these challenges, but if we're going to accomplish it, that is what we will have to do. So underpinning all of this, I think, will be the request for funding.
Yeah. Thank you, Paula. And for everyone, we're getting some very good questions, and we're going to come to them in a minute. I just want to ask one more question myself to the panelists. And I'm listening to you speak so eloquently, Paula, about why all of the panelists, about why this is so important and urgent. And yes, without a doubt, 2020 and the first 10 days of 2021 have shined a bright light on the need. But all of this does beg the question, why have we not made more progress as a country till now? These are not new issues. Yes, they are maybe more acute, but these are not new issues. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we've never defined.
Marc, you're off camera, by the way. I don't know if you want to.
I think we have. We, in the United States, we engage in debates sometimes about whether something is a private sector responsibility or a public sector responsibility. And we tend to see things as belonging in one lane or another. As a local government leader, I learned the magic was in thinking things as public-private partnerships, in defining the role of both sectors in achieving a big objective. And I think in this instance, we have to begin to say, no, this is not just about requesting the government to invest or to spend. We have to redefine the fact that this is really an appeal for there to be a partnership, because the private sector does do investing, and a call for the public sector to do additional investing in achieving an ultimate goal or an ultimate objective. Secondarily, I think we're not sharp enough in arguing benefits and rates of return. So can we sharpen the benefit to people and to society and to the nation on, if you will, increasing and closing the availability gap? What would it mean for quality of life? What would it mean for GDP? What would it actually mean? Same thing with dealing with the adoption gap. What would it mean if this amount was invested on the positive side? What about the access gap? There's abundant research that identifies what the racial wealth gap and income inequality costs the nation in terms of foregone GDP. We have to frame, think, define these issues very differently. And if this is a broad cause for the nation, then it is the responsibility of the private sector and the responsibility of the public sector working together. So we need a compact. And we need to think about what that compact really is all about. What's the engagement around achieving that? So we're not caught in what I call yesterday's arguments.
Yeah. Hey, Vivian, I want to echo what Marc said there. On the private sector piece, I think it's fair to say that, you know, a number of companies, including ours, have made a lot of progress, have great programs. I want to mention last week we announced a new an extension of a low-cost home broadband program, $19.99. For as little as $19.99, you can get a 200 meg program, and a lot of home broadband service, and a lot of the other national broadband providers have similar services. We also do work with digital literacy. We help low Title I schools, equip them with technology. You know, many of the folks in the private sector, you know, are doing these programs. Those are good, but they're not scalable nationwide, and they don't have the impact that a national program would. So we need an all of the above approach. We need to continue to invest at the private sector, and we will continue to do that. Build in rural America and invest in under-resourced communities with low-cost programs and training. But we also really need, this is a national problem, and we need to have a national response. And frankly, there are some things, when you asked earlier, what does the private sector need? We do need action from government to take a fresh look at how can we reform Lifeline or keep Lifeline, frankly, and augment it with some additional federal funding, because we need a centralized approach to this to really, if we want to make meaningful progress, to close this gap once and for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. Paula, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just wanted to express my agreement with Donna's framing. You know, a lot of companies have been working on these issues. Microsoft has its Airband initiative, where we're looking to partner with broadband providers to connect folks in rural America. We are now increasingly focused on urban communities, partnering with broadband providers there. We do a tremendous amount of skilling, digital skilling as well. We, you know, last year we committed to increasing that even more. So there's, you know, there's, I think, good work being done by folks in the private sector. Always looking for opportunities to be even more creative in terms of addressing those solutions. And, you know, appreciate that it is a partnership between private sector, public sector, and others. However, a national focus and a national plan and a national solution will help to move us all in the right direction, and working in a way that delivers more value than individual companies working on their own.
Brent, I think you wanted to say a word.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think that, you know, a lot of us saw the need for this a long time ago. However, the crisis that COVID-19 has created for our country, and the pandemic and the shutdowns that occurred, have brought the challenge into sharp relief. When we've seen African-American and Latino unemployment rates skyrocketing as a result of the pandemic and the shutdowns, we know that the types of occupations that Latinos and African-Americans are overrepresented in were the most impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. And so because of this, and then we think going forward, some of those jobs aren't going to be coming back. They're being replaced by jobs that require internet connectivity at the minimum, and sometimes technology skills on top of that. And so we think that this is absolutely critical at this point. If we're going to recover from the COVID-19 crisis, we have to ensure that everyone has connectivity. And so that's why we think that the will to move forward is stronger today than it ever has been.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Brent. Thank you of all of you. We're going to move in our remaining minutes to the questions. The first question I'm going to pose comes from Dominique Harrison. Dominique is the founding director of technology at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, and an alumni, I might add, of the Aspen Institute. Dominique asks, forgive me, what does the Biden administration need to do in the first 90 days to achieve some of the objectives of the plan? Of course, this first 90, 100 days is on everybody's mind. So what are the highest short-term priorities for this plan?
So I'll take it, offer some thoughts. So number one, it's important to appoint a FCC chair that embraces this plan, wants to champion this plan. These plans need champions inside of government, at the FCC, at the National Economic Council, in addition to the president. So I think one of the most important things is that. Number two, to the extent possible in the Biden administration's COVID and economic recovery / infrastructure plan, there's an opportunity to make a down payment on some of this, or to put a stake in the ground on some of the resources and dollars that might be needed to address this. Let me give you, for example. So for example, I think there's great attention, because it's coming from educators and parents and others who understand how devastating COVID has been on the academic performance of kids. And so to the extent that closing the availability gap and the adoption gap can be linked to the ability of children to be able to make up for lost time, catch up in their academic studies, or create a resilience against a future COVID type situation where people have to work remotely, then we have a shot. I mean, I think it's about making, threading the needle on why, for example, in this instance, closing the adoption gap and making, if you will, high-speed broadband affordable for all communities and trying to achieve universality is essential for children, for schooling, for homework, and for education. So we've got to, this is where coalitions have to be built. So this speaks to a coalition with educators, with teachers, principals, school administrators, members of Congress who are thinking, yeah, but how do you address? Well, one way of addressing it is, let's close the adoption gap. Let's confront the availability gap. So I think in the first two pieces of major legislation I anticipate would be a COVID relief / stimulus bill, and then an economic recovery infrastructure bill. Can this be included? An FCC chair with a passion for this, with the political skill and the connections to champion this from the seat of the chairmanship of the Federal Communications Commission, could be very influential in ensuring that this is always in the discussions when policies are being made in the new White House.
Thank you so much. By the way, we're getting lots and lots among the questions that are more about the substance of the plan. We're getting lots of questions about when can we see this plan? I know that there is an executive summary. It's a long plan. I know the executive summary will be published soon. Do you want to, Marc, can you just briefly
tell everybody, hold on, I got my blue pen and my red pen.
Oh boy, I know.
We're hoping to be able to polish up an executive summary, but let me say this. One of the predicates of this plan has been to have input. And we want to make sure there's a little bit of a checklist of people we want to make sure we speak to and we listen to make sure that we don't miss anything, because central to this is we're trying to coalition build. We're trying to build a coalition that would feel enthusiastic and fired up enough to go and promote this plan. So hold on. I don't want to give you a date, but it's coming very soon. And like I said, I got my blue pen here, got my red pen there.
And we at Aspen Digital will be sure to blast this out as soon as it's ready.
Yeah.
We'll publish it to our site. Then of course, now we're already getting questions. How can we be part of that coalition? I assume that will be part of the release of the document. So hold that space. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to add a new question. This is I love this question actually. Susan Mattis asks, is it naive to ask? First of all, there's no such thing about naive to ask anything, Susan, and to everybody else out there, I want to make that clear. But she says, is it naive to ask what types of actions individuals, rather than corporations or governments, can take to make a significant impact? What can individuals do here? Go ahead, Brent. Okay, and then Donna, I'll go to you after that.
I think this is a great question, because
I love it. Yeah.
To me, part of the frustration of the tech revolution has been, even though it's been fantastic and there's been so many incredible inventions, is that sometimes I think technologists invent for technology's sake, right? That's the end goal, to make the best thing possible and take the next step to create even better technology. And most of the time that works great. But what you end up having sometimes are things falling through the cracks. And I think it's important to ask individuals to think about what kind of an internet ecosystem do we want to see 10 years from now, 20 years from now, even say 25 years from now. That's a long time in tech speak. And then do we want a diverse ecosystem? Do we want one where Latinos and African Americans and other communities of color are included in it? Do we want them to be owners of companies that are successful? If you say yes to that, then these individuals should start thinking about, how do we make sure that the technology that we're creating in this technology revolution that we're part of is driving in that direction? Because I think too often we kind of like, well, we invented this, and wherever it happens, that's what's going to happen. The robots are going to be made, and I'm sorry if that dislocates your job. But we don't have to think of things that way. We should say, what do we want this new world to look like? How do we get there? And I think that's important for individuals to be thinking about that, not just thinking about what's the new invention that I can create that's going to be the next greatest thing.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, also individuals can get involved in their civic organizations, their churches, their nonprofit organizations, and help us with digital literacy. One of the challenging aspects of digital literacy is this high touch and high engagement, and that means engagement with trusted people. So trusted voices, to the extent that really it's grassroots organizations that have the relationships at the local level to really reach communities that may not have a lot of trust in government, frankly, to engage with them, to help them understand the relevance of broadband and also how to optimize the usage of it. And just going back to Dominique's question about what the Biden administration can do, I think it is imperative on the new administration to make it clear that there will be a focus on assisting low-income people connecting to broadband. That, they say a nation's priorities by what they spend their resources on. You look at their federal budget. And today, up until the COVID relief package, we haven't spent any federal money on assisting low-income people. And I think that using the bully pulpit from the FCC and from the administration to make it clear that, things are going to change in that regard.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a couple of questions that are related to the needs of older adults who may have all kinds of issues. They may be, very low income, significant tech literacy issues. And then one of our questioners points to, issues around ageism, the epidemic of loneliness, even before the pandemic began. So what does the plan say in support of the country's rapidly aging population?
I'm going to take that under advisement, because I think that's why we have the blue pen and the red pen, because clearly, given the question, we should ensure that the plan does address I would presume that for low income, older Americans, there is an adoption gap. There's a digital readiness gap. What's the best way to deal with that? What's the best way to confront that, right? For some low income, older Americans, there may be an availability gap. But given the question, and thanks for the question, team, you all are listening. Let's put that down as on our punch list of things to make sure we include in the final plan.
Good, thank you. You hear that, audience? You're having an impact here. We really have time just for one more question. I'm going to introduce this one from Fallon Wilson, Vice President of Policy at MMTC. It says the Latimer Plan appears quite thorough in the national solutions needed to address various issues of the digital divide, but how does it translate locally beyond community organizations? In other words, who in state and local government do we need to be educating on this plan to make it sustainable past federal solutions and funding?
Again, that's a really important question. I would say we've focused a lot on national public policy. And one of the reasons why is because we're talking about a national system. We're talking about private providers that operate across state lines, even if in some instances they may be regulated or impacted by state decision-making. What I would say is, and this is a part of this, we need to build a network of local advocates, local business people, local elected officials, local schools officials who can advocate, because the benefits of this are local. The benefits of closing the adoption gap, the access gap, and the availability gap are going to be in local communities. They're going to be in local neighborhoods. So I think, we didn't tackle with this, and I don't intend that we're going to tackle, at least on this iteration of it, what the specifically enumerated state or local policies could be or should be, although that is something we probably could do. But in the short run, we have a focus on really a national, the national public policy levers relative to broadband, the internet, and technology.
Thank you. We are unfortunately out of time. I only just want to mention, we don't even have time to answer these, but there are a number of other groups that questioners are pointing out, including addressing plan for people with disabilities, a flag for the Native American communities and others. So with your collective red and blue pens out there, I'll just represent those on the part of the audience. But obviously there's much.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Much more to come. It sounds like we will be hearing soon. We will make sure we at Aspen spread the word when the plan is ready and how you can participate. And with that, I just I don't have enough thanks for all of our panelists, Marc Morial, Brent Wilkes, Donna Epps, and Paula Boyd. Thank you so much for being us. Thank you to the audience for all your great questions, and to be continued, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.